Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Welcome to the Maryland Crimes Victims Resource Center Identity Theft and Cybercrimes webinar. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Afterwards, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. If you'd like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. If you need to reach an operator at any time, please press *0. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Tuesday, February 19, 2013. I would now like to turn the conference over to Mr. Russell Butler, Executive Director of Maryland Crimes Victims Resource Center. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Russell Butler from the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center. And on behalf of the National Identity Theft Victim Assistance Network, we'd like to welcome you to the webinar of the crossover on identity theft and cybercrimes. We're going to start with a poll. So if you would please, in the check box, please indicate the best response that describes your background. All right, so here we have the poll. Looks like we have a lot of victim service providers and a lot of others. Well, thank you for joining us today. Let me tell you a little bit about the National Identity Theft Victims Assistance Network. With funding from the Department of Justice, Office for Victims of Crime, Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center, have created the National Identity Theft Victims Assistance Network. There are 10 coalitions in 9 states, and the project seeks to help the field's capacity to respond to victims of identity theft. If you're interested in finding out more about the network, you have the website of the National Network and information about the 10 coalitions on your screen. So it is at this point my honor to introduce Michael Kaiser. Michael is the Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance. He served as Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance since 2008. Michael engages industry, government, and nonprofit leaders in far-reaching efforts including Stop, Think, Connect campaign, National Cyber Security Awareness Month, Data Privacy Day, and the National Cybersecurity Education Council. Michael has 25 years in all of nonprofit operations, including program management, administration, and governance. Prior to NCSA, he served the field of victim service, holding senior staff positions at the National Center for Victims of Crime and Safe Horizons in New York City. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Kaiser.
Thank you, Russell. Let me just say it's an honor and a privilege to be speaking to you all today. Russell, I really appreciate all the work that you've done personally as well as the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center. I think you all are a tremendous resource for the field and really trying to do a lot of fantastic work in all areas of victimization, but especially today since we're talking about identity theft in the area of identity theft. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and let's have at it, and let's talk about some of the issues in cyber. We do have some learning objectives for today. Hopefully you can see these on your screen now. I'm not going to go through them in depth, but we're going to try and cover a lot of issues. We're not going to go in extreme depth in many areas, so please use that question box to ask questions when we get to that part of the presentation a little later on in the afternoon. Be happy to try and answer specific questions. I know often on presentations like this, people come to listen, but often have one burning question that they'd like to get answered, and we will try to answer as many of those as we can in the second part of the presentation. So I want to start by talking about what do we talk about when we talk about cyber. You know, cybersecurity is a word that if you're not in the field can have, and even if you're in the field for that matter, can have lots of differing definitions. But one of the key areas of cyber that I think sometimes gets overlooked for the sort of the more general public point of view, more of the inside baseball point of view, if you will, is critical infrastructure. And if you've been listening to the newspapers, listening to the news, reading the newspapers recently, you know, you'll hear people like, you know, Secretary Napolitano and Leon Panetta, you know, former Defense Secretary, you know, talking about, you know, a cyber Pearl Harbor. And when they talk about that, they're talking about the potential for an attack on what are called critical infrastructure. And the slide here shows, I believe there's 18 of them, areas of critical infrastructure. And you can see that they include some things like chemicals, public health, the water supply, you know, food and agriculture, energy, and the fear in cybersecurity, if we were to suffer a big attack, would be that someone would try to shut down that part of the infrastructure. Now, it's not only about a major attack, right? In fact, cybersecurity is often, at least from the perspective of the National Cybersecurity Alliance, is often about maintaining and building a safe and trusted internet. And that's part of where I think cybersecurity dovetails a lot with what you all do in victim services as well as law enforcement and some of the others that are on the phone. Because if you look in the upper right-hand corner of that slide, you'll see banking and finance, which is really where a lot of the identity theft takes place and where a lot of that identity theft creates a lot of erosion of trust in some of the most really robust parts of the internet at this point. All these other pieces of the critical infrastructure, the reason we're concerned is that they're becoming increasingly connected to the internet. But in banking and finance, we know that's really where consumers, I mean in some other areas as well, such as energy and government and some of these other ones, they do connect to the internet, but it's really banking and finance which, you know, has a lot of your commercial operations going on and where data is being collected and data is being stored that would have an impact on consumers and small businesses and the people that you might come in contact with. But it's very important to understand this holistic picture of cyber because, and I think this will be pretty straightforward to people, but as you sort of live in the digital world, you will see now that almost everything is now connected to the internet in an advantageous way to all of us. However, protecting that critical infrastructure is really what we call cybersecurity. So when we talk about cyber, we also talk about different groups of users. When we say home users here, we really mean home users of all kinds and all ages. So security, from our perspective, the National Cybersecurity Alliance, and when we promote things like National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we talk about cybersecurity as a shared responsibility. And that means everybody is involved and engaged. And home users, the kinds of people who may be coming to you because they've been victims of identity theft, are very much a part of the cybersecurity landscape. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold here, so I may have a couple of moments if I have to clear my throat. And we consider cybersecurity a shared responsibility. So that means that everyone has to protect their part of the internet and everyone has to do their part to secure the networks that they use or operate. And interestingly enough, home users these days are very much a part of the network. I think the last research we conducted about a year ago indicated that about 70% of all homes in the United States are operating wireless networks. So we have networks operating everywhere, and at the end of the day when we talk about cybersecurity, we talk about only being strong as the weakest link in any network. And so that could be a home user, which opens up a gateway, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as time goes on. Obviously, businesses, small and large, are very much engaged in this effort of cybersecurity as well. We see businesses as the recipients and guardians of large amounts of data, and we need to work with them to make sure that they're protected. And of course, government is both a repository of information, a provider of information, and a target of cyber attacks as well. Both back to that critical infrastructure piece, right? who of our enemies wouldn't want to try, if we were engaged in some kind of warfare, wouldn't want to try to take down our government. But they might also just as be happy taking down Wall Street, or turning off the electric grid, or stopping our airline systems from working, or those kinds of things. So the question comes back to, where is your data, or where is data, right? And so obviously we'll start from sort of the bottom up here and talk about some of the basic things. Your home computer is a vast resource of data, and if people start to think about what's on there, I want them to think about it in two ways. So you have your own personal information, which is very important to protect, right? You may have, it's coming into tax season, you may have your tax records on there. You may have school records from your children. You may have some business records if you run some kind of home business. You may have all kinds of other information about you in some kind, way, shape, or form that you have on your home computer. This data could come in all different kinds of forms. So think about as well that data is also things that are contained in pictures. Pictures, a family photo taken out front of your house with a picture of your car with a license plate and your street number provides a lot of personal information about you that you may not think of right off the top of the bat when you think of the kind of data that's out there. Your data may be in company databases. Let me go back to the home computer for 1 second. You also have enormous amounts of data about other people. Right? People are sending you emails, so you have their email address. You have contact lists. You may have other information about people in your family or your friends, like their birthday and other kinds of things. So in the end, we are all repository of data in the digital age, and there may be much more that you have about other people as well. And we really believe that everyone has to respect the privacy of others and safeguard the data they have. So it's not just data about yourself, it's data about others. Obviously your data is sitting in company databases of all different kinds. Anybody you might have a commercial transaction with, whether you're buying things online or in other kinds of ways, they may have data about you. Obviously there are data brokers who are collecting information about you and using it. Anybody such as your bank, or where you have an extended relationship in some kind of way, is going to have extensive data about you, both financial and otherwise. Your name's going to be in government databases, whether it's your local government, perhaps in the real estate tax database or other kinds of ways. Your mobile devices, and not only yours, but the mobile devices of others, a very rich source of data, right? If you think of your mobile device for a moment, it probably replicates in many ways the data you have on your home computer, and may very well replicate the data you have on your work computer, or it may be combined and have both your home and work computer all in one in your mobile device. So really a very, very data-rich source. Your ISP obviously has, which is your internet service provider, has data about you. Marketing firms are collecting data about you in different kinds of ways. And as we look toward the future now, we see other kinds of things happening. Cars, for example. I mean, if you've seen some of the new ads on TV, about the kinds of things that cars are doing, or you see the ways that people are talking about the internet in the future, we're going to see things like our refrigerators connected to the internet. Any of you who have heard the term smart grid know that that's an area now underway in the electrical system to try and connect homes and other users of electricity to the internet, to track usage, to provide opportunities for people to control their usage in a little different ways, and to provide more proactive ways to manage the electric grid, including on the electrical company side, much easier way to chart how much electricity you're using without having to send someone to your house every month to look at your meter and read your meter, which is quite expensive. So there are many more, and you can think about those. So when we think about what needs to be protected, there are lots of different things. I think normally when we think about this, we think very quickly of, okay, I've got to protect my name, my address, my social security number, my birth date, my children's names, all those kinds of things. And those obviously are very, very important elements of your personal information. And each one of those elements of your personal information has a different kind of value. And the more someone has about you, the more they can engage in identity theft, right? And I think that's a theme that we should be thinking about throughout this presentation today, are the different kinds of ways that people might use this data. But obviously, if someone has your name, your address, your social security number, and a few other things, they have all of you, and that's a lot of information to have. Obviously, we talked about this a little earlier, you could have all different kinds of records and statements and things that contain information of a personal nature that could be combined with other kinds of information. So whatever you're getting, whatever kind of statements you're getting, statements from your health provider, from your bank, any kinds of tax statements that you're getting. It's tax time. We're all getting, reports back in of, any interest we earned from any other kinds of accounts and those kinds of things, all coming across now. A lot of that either coming electronically or available electronically and may be sent to you. I already talked a little bit about, pictures and other identity information, your calendar, where you're going to be tomorrow, next week, next month, at the end of the year. And here's one that I think really need to think about a lot, and that is your credentials. So, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more when I talk a little more depth about cybercrime. But your credentials, which in many cases are your password and your logon, is a gateway to your identity in a whole different kind of way. And I think if, as we've seen lately, those are credentials that people try to steal. And so you really need to think of those credentials. And you've probably all heard, have a strong password over and over and over again, have a unique password for every single account over and over and over again. It's really important. So I ask you to sort of think for a moment about, what would somebody learn from you if they got your Amazon logon and password? What would people know about you if they had your, Facebook logon and password? What would they find out about you if they got your banking logon and password? And for those people who have the same password for all those accounts, you're basically making it extremely easy for people to develop enormous amounts of intelligence about you in an extremely short period of time. And then, of course, when we talk about business records, and this is where, and really it's going to depend what kind of community you're in, but there are a lot of people that work from home now. There are a lot of people who run small businesses that they run out of their homes, or basically their small business is almost like a home environment, because it's one or two people in a small office, or perhaps a small store, or some kind of small firm, that's construction or something. An enormous amount of information can be in those business records, not only information about themselves, but about their clients and perhaps their employees as well. So you can think about what other information might need to be protected. So, here's the data. We've been talking about what's out there. How does it get lost? Where does data get lost? So there's a couple of different ways that are kind of the classic ways. Infection, right? So maybe you've heard the term malware, or what we like to, malicious software that we call malware. That is software that gets put onto a machine or a network that is nefarious by its nature, that is put there to do things to harm you. Malware can take all different kinds of form in what it's trying to achieve, and we'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute when I talk about sort of the kinds of attacks that are out there. But know that those infections are really a major source of data loss, because they can lead to things like the capturing of keystrokes, which would be, for example, the capturing of your password as you enter it into a website, or your logon as you're entering into your website, or your date of birth as you're logging it into your website, or an email, the exact text of an email that you might be writing that's of a very personal nature. So infections are the things that we're extremely concerned about. You may have heard of things called botnets, which are basically networks of infected computers. These are networks that are operated by cyber criminals and hackers. These networks are used to infect other computers. They're used to use people's computers to generate spam. They're used to steal credentials, used to steal contact lists. So botnets are a phrase you may have heard. They're a very important element in the infection ecosystem because infected machines can be controlled from a different place. For what they call a command and control server can tell an infected machine what to do, and you would never know that it was doing it. Things have really changed in the last few years. It used to be we tell people if your machine is slow, if you're getting pop-ups, if you're getting all those things, you might be infected, and that's no longer the truth. The bad guys are like, why would I want anybody to know I'm on this machine? It's much better for me, and I make more money if no one knows I'm on this machine. So the infected machines and the malware is very stealthy right now. And we'll talk about how to fight some of these things a little bit later, but I want you to understand the importance of what infection means in the cyber world. Phishing attacks and social engineering and spear phishing are really one of the core elements, and probably, I mean, you know, when you think about the kind of folks that you all are going to see, there's probably these three things: phishing, infection, and spear phishing, social engineering, are the three ways that they may be most engaged in trying to protect themselves. Wi-Fi is also obviously a very important part of that. We'll talk about that as a separate element. So phishing, social engineering. Phishing is basically people sending, could be anything, an email, could be a post on a social network, could be what they call smishing, which is basically a texting message. It could be vishing, could even be a voicemail message, right, where they send you a message that basically encourages you to click on a link, open a document, which could lead to infection, and do other things that might reveal personal information. The phrase, the term of art in the computer world is social engineering. The phrase of art in the world that most of you deal in is fraud, but basically what they're trying to do is get people to give information. And here's an example, and you've probably all seen these. Somebody sends an email to someone, says your account, something's wrong with your account, there's an emergency, you need to log on immediately, click on this link, give us your email and password. That is social engineering in the sense that they're trying to get people to do things which they know they shouldn't do, click on links in suspicious emails, but they create an environment where it seems like a desperate moment. You know, you need to do this right away. Your Amazon order, there's a problem with your Amazon order, it can't be shipped. Your package is lost, please log on right away. Those kinds of things. They're kind of a direct mail approach to fraud in the sense that, you know, this is where a lot of spam comes from. People are generating, you know, millions and millions and millions of these emails, hoping for a, you know, the same kind of return rate that you might get in, you know, direct mail, right? If you send out 100 million emails and half of a percent of people respond to it, that's still a heck of a lot of people, personal information that you're gathering. And because the cost of entry is so low to send those emails, they can do them over and over and over again. So that's social engineering and phishing. Now, spear phishing, which I think is something for those of you who might be in law enforcement or working with small businesses, is really an important element of the vulnerability ecosystem right now. So the bad guys have gotten smarter. They realize that when you send an email that has you know, typos in it, bad language, other kinds of things, that users are getting smarter, and they're saying, you know, I don't really think that's from my bank. They wouldn't misspell this word, or they wouldn't do that kind of thing. So those kinds of attacks have become less productive for them. But spear phishing allows a very targeted attack, and I'll give you sort of an understanding of how this works. So let's say Acme hardware company, distributor of hardware, gets infected, right, through somebody on the company went to a bad website, pulled down some malware. That malware looks for a couple of things. It looks for the customer contact list of that company, and perhaps the sales director's log on to their password information. So looking for extremely specific things. It gets that through the malware. It then they create another email that now looks like it comes from a very trusted source because it's coming from the director of sales to the contacts of that company. Those people are used to getting emails from that person, And so now an email comes out that says Acme is holding a sale this month on, bolts, nuts, and washers. Click on the attached PDF to see, all the discount prices for the upcoming sale. Boom. People, trusted source, they click on it. That PDF is infected, and now they've got access into all these other companies at the same time. So, and they just keep building and building and building. And one thing you have to remember about all of this, at the end of the day, in the cybercrime ecosystem, data is the coin of the realm. And data gets bought, exchanged, and it's a highly structured criminal environment. There are people that collect data. There are people that take that data and monetize cards. There are people that monetize that data in other ways. So people sell data to experts who monetize that data. So it's a very highly structured system, but that initial data collection is really the coin of the realm. So I want people to understand that, because if you read the papers and you listen to the news, you're going to hear things like spear phishing coming up a lot recently. Unsecured Wi-Fi is an extremely area that people just need to pay very close attention to. Unsecured Wi-Fi is any Wi-Fi that doesn't require any kind of credentials to log on. Even those that do require credentials, like at a hotel, could have hundreds of people on it at any one time. And once you're on that network, there's possibilities that people could gain access to your system. And in unsecured, definitely they can, and maybe sniffing that network and watching the traffic that goes over it. So that's a real vulnerability point. Some of those Wi-Fi, like some of those early attacks like on TJ Maxx, when they stole like hundreds of millions of credit card information, that part of that was sniffing through a Wi-Fi network. Payment systems has also been a huge area of data loss. We have seen that time and time and again. Credit cards stolen from companies, stolen from small businesses like restaurants and dry cleaners and the like. When their payment systems aren't secured, they haven't updated them. And that's a loss of a lot of credit card data comes through that kind of system. Look at lost and stolen. I think probably almost everybody has heard about a story about a government agency or a company. There have been a couple recently that somebody lost a laptop, and on it were 20 million names, or a laptop gets stolen. We always think of cybersecurity. Sorry, there goes that cold again. As being all electronic, but if someone were to break into somebody's office and steal a laptop, it could be the same thing. So where are the threats? Where do they come from? They come from a variety of different places. So the external threats, in my mind, really break down into three categories. Now, some of you, may have some different ones, but these are, I think, the three major ones that I think we should pay attention to right now. And they all have different goals. I'm going to start at the bottom and say nation states, right? So nation states, if anybody read the New York Times today, you'll see there was a huge article about China and their the Chinese military and their espionage organization to try and siphon off information from the United States. So nation states have a couple different goals, right? A, they want intelligence, so they want to steal stuff, about what we're trying to do, right? They want to get our secrets. Two, in the case of, and this is a little more murky, but this is part of a great concern in cyber, the stealing of intellectual property and trade secrets, so trade espionage. You can think for a moment about what would happen if a company in the United States spent $20 million developing a new product, all those research got stolen, and then someone in another country could now replicate that product without having to put any money into R&D. It's a huge drain of capital and investment and a huge risk to our economy. And obviously nation states at some point may want to go on the offensive and engage in cyber war with us. So they may want to be able to crack our network, stop things. When you look at the critical infrastructure problems, I mean, that's really nation states and possibly other groups who don't like us, right? Terrorist groups and the like, who might want to try and disrupt our economy, disrupt our way of life through a cyber attack. Cyber criminals are in it for the money. Why do they rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why are they on the internet trying to steal people's identities? Because that's where the money is. And those are the organized crime gangs. Most of them are organized. They run everything from a kid down the street or a local identity theft ring, all the way up to highly organized international crime rings. They're the ones running a lot of the malware, running a lot of the botnets, stealing a lot of the consumer information, the payment information, trying to break into small businesses and get credentials for banking and making bank transfers. That's been a big issue lately. They basically create a new payroll and send it off to another country. Unauthorized bank transfers. Small business might have $150,000, $200,000 in its account, and they try to vacuum that out. It's a pretty great crime for them because it's very hard to get caught, and can be pretty lucrative if it works. And so cyber criminals, are just like other criminals. They're just, they're in it for financial gain. And hackers are sort of the, they're in the middle. Sometimes they may engage in certain kinds of criminal activity. I mean, some of it is criminal by its nature, but they're not necessarily in it for the money. They might be in it more for disruption. They may be in it more for making a political statement of some way, shape, or form. We've seen with, like Anonymous, sometimes, launching an attack against a site they disagree with or a government they disagree with. Actually, from a interesting, I don't know if any of you have tracked the case in Steubenville, Ohio, but there has been, they have actually gone in and hacked some of the evidence in the sexual assault case there that's been quite a big stir in the community, and revealed some of that on the net to try and show that there's corruption or other things going on. So they can work in different kinds of ways. The issue with hackers, and to some degree with cyber criminals as well, is that they're non-aligned, right? They're not nation states. They're not necessarily aligned with an organization. Sometimes they can just be groups of like-minded individuals who could be operating across the globe. This is from my perspective, one of the most interesting emerging areas, because if you think in the past, in order to create an attack on another country or even another group, you needed physical locality, and you probably needed the backing of some kind of organized state or organization. But hackers can work in the wild and align themselves either individually on their own or align themselves with a few other like-minded folks. It's a very interesting dynamic which we have to face. Then, of course, you have the internal threats in cyber, which are unhappy employees who may decide to, steal data and sell it. Bad security practices, which we'll talk about a little bit in a little bit more, some of the things you can do to address that. And then you have things, like accidents. Data accidentally get lost, got left in a car, and somebody stole the laptop, or somebody had some stuff on a thumb drive and left it on an airplane. All kinds of things like that, and then just straight out theft. Somebody breaks in, steals your computers, does those kinds of things, or steals something out of a hotel room, and those are some of the threats. I think a lot of you know about this data loss environment at some level. I think some of the things that we're concerned about, and has been in the papers and in the news a lot lately, is the number of households with young people who are getting their identity stolen. There's obviously a lot of benefit to the person who steals the identity for stealing for a young person. If you can get a 10-year-old identity and establish credit in their name, it could be 8 to 10 years of smooth sailing until anything's found. When that child maybe graduates high school or maybe graduates college and starts to go out in the world and establish themselves in a credit history. You could have a very long run if you really wanted to engage in that kind of long-term identity theft of a person. And we do know that there is a fair number of percentage, and I don't know off the top of my head. When I worked in victim services, I probably would have been more aware of this number off the top of my head, the number of all crimes that are committed by people that know each other. But identity theft is no different. And we know that, here we see 27%, knowing the individual responsible for the crime. And there's reasons for that too, right? If you think about this, and this is true in other types of crime like domestic violence and stalking, the more you know about someone to start out with, the more likely you are to be able to steal their information. So if you used to date someone, you're going to probably know a lot about them. You may even know enough to crack their passcode, their password, right? You certainly know their email, which could be half of their logon. You might know their birthday if they're using that as a password, or other kinds of things. You may already know their social security number. Maybe they left it lying around the house. So you're going to have other information. You're going to have a head start on some of these other folks. On the corporate side, there's a great report, and you can see here, there's a link to it at the bottom, the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. For those of you in law enforcement, for those of you really interested in this issue, this is a must-see report. You can, this is the 2012 report, which actually the 2013 probably comes out in a couple months. This report is compiled by Verizon with the help of the Secret Service. I don't know, for those of you who don't know, the Secret Service is actively engaged in addressing financial crime. And this is just some of the records, some of the data that they have. 855 incidents, 174 million compromised records in 2012. 90% of the breaches from their perspective were avoidable through simple or intermediate controls, and that could have been anything from having good antivirus all the way up to who gets permissions on the network and beyond. Interestingly enough, in the data breach in this environment, 98% of it was external, right? So a lot of times the internal threat gets a lot of focus, and there are internal threats, don't get me wrong, but in this cases there was a lot of external. And I think, most distressingly, these attacks were not highly difficult, right? So unfortunately in cyber, it doesn't always take a PhD in computer science to launch an attack, especially in the cybercrime world, where you can actually buy what are known as things like exploit kits. You can buy these things. You can buy phishing, what they call phishing kits on the black market, and which is basically software ready to go to launch an attack. So an area of concern for us is small businesses because they sit on enormous amounts of data and they're extremely vulnerable. When we look at small businesses, well, let me look at the business environment in general here, right? So the bigger enterprises, the banks, the internet service providers, your large multinational companies, the large e-commerce sites, they have been under attack for years. And they have been fighting off attacks for years, and frankly, they're getting pretty good at it. Not to say that they don't get it, they don't occasionally, miss something, but some of you may have heard the phrase advanced persistent threat, or APT. This is something that basically people who work in security, or the chief security folks, or the security folks in any of these big institutions, they spend their whole days fighting off attacks. They're getting hundreds, if not thousands, of attacks on their networks a day, and they're fending off virtually all of them at this point. Not that there aren't other risks, like some of those employee risks and some of the accidents, and they can lose data in other ways, but they are very defended networks at this point. Small businesses, on the other hand, are much more likely to not have all the security practices in place. Excuse me again, my little cold here. I didn't plan to have a cold when we started this, the idea for this webinar. They don't have as much they need to have in place. Yet we see that there's increasing need for a safe and trusted internet to be critical to their business. 46% of the businesses we surveyed last year said that it's very critical that they have that. Yet the sad news is that 87% of the small businesses that we surveyed don't even have a formal written internet security policy. I think only 70% don't even have an informal internet security policy, which I would define as like, hey, do you know you shouldn't be going to that, that website during the day at the office, right? So it's a very serious in the small businesses, and guess who knows that? The cyber criminals know that. And that's why, remember when I was talking earlier about phishing attacks and spear phishing attacks? The reason that there's so many spear phishing attacks right now in small businesses is because the cyber criminals know that it's a much more target-rich environment. And if they can't get in the front door of a big company, right, by trying to break through the network, maybe they can get in the back door through one of the vendors that they deal with at a small business, or they can just accumulate data on a lot of small businesses. So how do we mitigate these data breaches? Well, cyber criminals and others are going to knock on every door until they find an open one. So you have to make sure that all the doors are closed. And it starts by some pretty simple things like assessing your risk, right? What are your risks? Do you have, are all your servers connected to the internet? Do your employees travel? Do they bring their own devices into work? what kinds of emails coming over the transom, those kinds of things. Monitoring the threats that are out there. Are you aware of the environment, the threat environment that's happening? Are you reporting attacks that are happening to you to places that you might report them, whether it's, there are some places like the FTC that can, and the Internet Crime and Complaint Center where you can report some of these things, including your local police. Do you have a cybersecurity plan in place? So there's really two kinds of plans you got to have if you're going to run. And by the way, I think this, when I say small business, I really actually include nonprofit organizations. I've been in nonprofits my whole life. We are small businesses, right? We have payrolls, we have employees, we have, in fact, I would say in some of the victim services organizations, we are entrusted with, enormous amounts of personal information about people, about their histories, about what's happened to them. We may have actually vast amounts of information about them. So a security plan needs to have two elements, right? It needs to have a strategy going forward. As you build your organization or business, how are you going to keep it more secure, train your employees, when you add new systems on, when you buy new software, when you source things, how are you going to maintain a secure environment? And equally important, what are you going to do if you have a problem? What are you going to do if you have an attack? What are you going to do if data gets lost? How are you going to protect your customers? How are you going to talk to your customers if you lose their data? These are really how you start to mitigate the potential for data breaches. Training your employees is very critical here. Even and it doesn't have to be super technical either. It can be very simple, like things about email hygiene, about machine hygiene, things around using things like USB memory sticks, which happens to be a huge area of the way that systems get compromised, right? But also thinking about, are your employees allowed to access their, email from home or the network from home? That's been the source of a lot of attacks, in small businesses. So training your employees and having a plan, thinking about security, thinking about cybersecurity, understanding that. We did some research a few years ago, and one of the reasons that small businesses gave that they didn't engage in security more than as much as they should is that they didn't think they were going to be a victim. Well, I think we've all heard that from a lot of different people in different kinds of ways, and we know that that's not true, and we know that small businesses are actually a prime target at this point. So thinking about all this, thinking about how we protect people, here's some tips for home users. First of all, if you should, we'll talk about a little bit more about this in a second too, but obviously collecting and keeping any evidence that you have of any kind of attack that takes place is very important. We like to say, one of our phrases here, we run a thing called the Stop, Think, Connect campaign. The Stop, Think, Connect campaign is a national campaign to help people stay safe and secure online. It was founded by NCSA and the Anti-Phishing Working Group. It was created by 25 companies and 7 federal agencies. It's being deployed. The Department of Homeland Security is the lead in the federal government on education awareness on cybersecurity. They promulgate that campaign through everything they do. Companies like Facebook and Google and Microsoft and ADP and others, Verizon, AT&T, all use the campaign. And one of our major pieces of advice in that is a very simple one. It's keep a clean machine, free from infections and malware. This is the #1 thing that people can do to protect themselves. When we think about cybercrime, hackers, and nation states, and we think about what people can do, we need to get them focused not on the threat, that the XYZ government is going to try and come and take down their community, because most people aren't engaged in protecting against that. That's what government does, that's what their local government does, that's what industry does that are fighting these threats. But it starts with what they do at home and how they keep a clean machine. And that really means, it's very simple, it means up-to-date software. And not just security software like AV and spyware, but the key software that they're using. So whether it's the operating system, right, that they have, making sure that the patches that are come out are installed, whether it's the other key software like readers, Adobe readers, PDFs, those things being installed and up to date, and also their web browser, very, very important. Web browsers are a vector of attack. and vulnerabilities in web browsers is one of the ways that people get attacked all the time. When those updates become available, you must install them, and you must do it right away. Maybe you've heard the phrase zero-day vulnerability. That's a vulnerability in the system that has yet to be discovered, been patched, and that's what the bad guys are looking for. They're looking for 0 days so that no one's figured out how to patch it yet or even knows that the problem is there, and they use those to launch their attack. When in doubt, throw it out. I mean, this is really just the core advice for everybody on the internet. Links in emails, tweets, posts, ads, that's the way they compromise your computer, right? Act now, think, do something right away. Be wary of those communications that implore you to act immediately. Offer something that's too good to be true. Really need to be avoided. You just want an iPad? I doubt it. Here's a certificate for a free Southwest airline flight? Not likely, right? So people have to have their suspicious antenna up all the time. I think one of the things that the criminals take advantage of on the internet is that it is a fast-paced, fast-moving environment. And like, ooh, look at this thing somebody just sent me. And when somebody gets hacked, right? So if somebody's Facebook or Twitter account were to get hacked, and they were to start sending those messages, look like they come from that person, right? And so Janie is telling me that I've got this thing for free now that I didn't have before. This really have to be suspicious. In a case like that, guess what? You know Janie. You know her personally. You can email her offline. You can pick up the phone and call her, right? And you can ask, did you send me this? Is this really true? That's one way to protect it. Owning your online presence is something that we consider to be extremely important. See, some of these are technological and some of these are educational and consumer-based action. Owning your online presence is very, very important. What you put online and what you share online in many regards is up to you. And so you need to own that. You need to make sure that, for example, on any online service that you're using, any social network or other account that offers security settings or privacy settings, you should always understand how those work, and you should set them to your comfort level of sharing. Some of us are very public people, and we may want to share a lot. We need to understand the consequences of sharing and the potential harms that could come with that. But if you do that and that's the kind of person you are, okay. And some of us are very private, and we should know how to use the internet in a way that we can lower our profile. Secure your accounts, ask for protections. Well, I'll talk about this in a second toward the end. That password issue, again, please, 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 unique account, unique password, separate passwords for every account really, closes the window on a lot of, makes it harder for cyber criminals, right? So you understand how this works at some level. There are password cracking programs that criminals use that can go through every single word in the entire dictionary in a short period of time. So if you're just using a word, or if you're using that awful password 1234 or password, or I love you, or your birth date, it's really a problem. We'd like to say long, strong, and unique. That's the way to do passwords. There are a lot of different devices for creating a safe password. Some of the ones that we often tell people, mostly the classic ones are use uppercase, lowercase, use numbers and symbols all combined. That gets the biggest hurdle to safe passwords, is that people are afraid they're going to forget them, which of course is true because we all do. So come up with a device. Some people like things like take the first line of your favorite songs or songs that you like and take the first letter from each one of those words, make some upper and lower case, right? Those are easy to remember. Add a number and a symbol at the end, or a number and a symbol in the beginning or the middle, and that's going to be a much more secure password. So really, take some time. That's probably the fastest thing everybody could do tomorrow. When they hang up the phone, you could change your password and make it longer, stronger, and switch them out for different things, and that would be a big help. And then Wi-Fi. Really extreme caution on Wi-Fi is all I can say. Note that your cell phone, when it's connected to the internet via your cellular carrier, is more secure than a Wi-Fi connection. Very important to note. Wi-Fi's at home should all be locked down with passwords. And if you're in a public hotel or those kinds of things, I would just use extreme caution. I wouldn't be logging on to things like my bank or my email or other things. Fine to go surf for the nearest restaurant, that kind of stuff, but I would be careful in other ways. This is about victims and cybercrime, and so what should victims of cybercrime be urged to do? This is actually advice we got really from the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center, and a lot of their classic advice, and I think many of you may know some of this. A fraud alert, with the major credit groups, really important, so that if in case somebody tries to open a new line of credit, that you will be notified. Credit reports obviously are going to show you indicators of whether someone's been accessing your credit or your credit's changing and you don't know about it. You need to document and keep evidence of all the things you do, especially when you're reporting things. But I think if you've gotten emails or things that you think are suspicious, you can save those. It's important. It's important to actually report those as well. Many of the services that you use, your ISP, might have a spam reporting, or some of the major, a lot of the major e-commerce sites have an email that you can just forward, like a spoof or spam email to. You might think, well, why should I do that? They've already seen that. But there's a lot of intelligence in an email. There's a lot of information about where it was routed, where it came from, what the source was, and those kinds of things. And also threats tend to come up and down, and it's really important that they collect that data. Create an identity theft report. You can do that at the ftc.gov. I'll say that they have an online complaint, as does the Internet Crimes Complaint Center. I think it's ic3.gov or org. We can clarify that. But that's important too. We don't have an enormous amount of information on identity theft. It's not a crime that's heavily reported, or certainly is not as reported as it probably takes place. So it's helpful for people to know what's going on. File a police report when you can. I think that's really important that we understand. Again, crime stats are one of the ways that we focus attention on issues of concern when it comes to crime. And so when people report crime, we learn more about how much is happening and maybe get other resources or ways of addressing it. Change passwords and PINs on breached accounts. Frankly, if you think you lost your data, or if you think in some way that your data was lost, or you get notified that your data was lost, I would go in and change as many of your passwords and PINs as you can, not just on breached accounts, but on all your accounts. And back to some of the research we do. So we do research every October for National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and last year we asked how many people, what percentage, we asked people whether in the last year they'd been notified that by a company or an entity that their data had been lost, and 25% of the people we surveyed said they had been notified of such. So if you're notified, it doesn't always mean that your data is going to be used or monetized. So when somebody steals 100 million credit card numbers, the likelihood that they're actually going to be able to monetize all those is pretty difficult. They may sell it to other people, but whether cyber criminals will ever get to actually using your credit card number before it gets canceled by the credit card company when they realize it's been stolen is a different issue. But anyway, you should change all those passwords and all those things. Now, this next one is a little more complicated. Ask for or implement multi-factor authentication where available. So you remember in the very beginning I talked a little bit about, most people just have a password and a logon, right? So that's how you authenticate yourself. When you put in your password and your login to your bank account, you're authenticating to the bank. I'm Michael Kaiser because I've given you these two identifying pieces of information. Well, multi-factor authentication is when there's a third or fourth or fifth or sixth piece of information that you give someone in order to authenticate yourself. There are many places where there may be multi-factor authentication, which is what we call it in the term of art, where it's available. So one of those places, for all you Gmail users, they have one called two-step verification. So you can sign up for that program, and when you log on, they will also sometimes, in certain circumstances, email you or text you to your mobile phone another code that you have to put in before you can log on to your Gmail. Facebook uses social authentication in a few different places to authenticate. Your bank, some of you may have banks that say, give us a picture, and then when you go to log on for certain things, we'll show you, and you have to pick the picture that you gave us, right, before we'll let you in your account. Some banks may offer key fobs, which have revolving, which basically have these one-time use passcodes. So you log in with your name, your password, and then you have to look at the key fob, and you have to put in a number, and that password's one use only, and 30 seconds after you put it in, it can never be used again. You can still stay on and you do everything you need to do during that session, but that number can never be used again. So these are things that really thwart a lot of the cyber criminals. So I would ask your bank. I would look at the services that you use. They're not always publicly, they don't always advertise it. There's some tension in the cybersecurity world between security and convenience, right? Some people think, oh, if you have to ask people to put in a second or third factor of authentication, they're not going to want to use my service anymore. And there are some people now starting to say, maybe having a second or third factor actually makes people trust us more. That's where I hope we go. And there are some issues, there's some stuff going on in the federal government now around authentication and schemes of authentication that will probably become widely available to the public over the next couple of years, which some of you really keep close track of this may have seen that there are some people now saying, the password is dead, and hopefully we won't have passwords in the future, and that will help a lot, and I agree with that. If you think you've been attacked, go ahead. Alert your financial or institution for fraudulent activity. Obviously, if you lose any government-issued identification, or even not only government, but I would also say, if you lose the identification for your work as well, please report that immediately. And if you're a victim of identity theft, make sure that debt collectors understand that and have all the police reports and other documents that you need, so ready to go. So I think we're getting ready to talk about questions in a second, so we'll figure out, I see that there are a lot of them coming in, so we'll have to address some of those. Just a couple of other resources before we move on to questions. StopThinkConnect.org, you've heard me talk about that. That's this campaign. Anybody can join it. There's free resources there. You can sign up for it. You can use those resources if you're building a campaign in your community with all of universal tips and advice. It's all there for you guys, posters, web banners, tip sheets, a lot of stuff. So come take a look at that. Stay Safe Online also, our website has a lot of good tips and advice. You can follow us at facebook.com at StopThinkConnect and at twitter.com at StopThink without an I Connect, because somebody had that. And there's my email address. So there's my personal information right out there for all the world to see. I guess we're ready to take some questions.
Michael, yeah, we've had a whole lot of questions.
Okay.
One of them was, can you suggest some additional readings, texts for people who want to get more information or possibly even teach a course in cybercrime law?
Cybercrime law, I'm not as the law part of it, I'm not as an expert in. I know Russell, that you wrote a chapter on a book on victimology in cybercrime. Maybe you can mention that at the end of this and encourage people to do that. I think sources of information in this are varied. There are some books. People have written books about certainly cyber warfare and other kinds of things. People have written some books about identity protection, but this is an ever-evolving threatscape, and I really encourage people to go to things like the Verizon Data Breach Report, which will give you sort of the up-to-date information that might be out there, to look for the research groups like the Anti-Phishing Working Group, which publish a quarterly report of their analysis of what's going on in the phishing world and the cybercrime underworld when it comes to the kinds of attacks that are going on. There are a couple of other companies like Symantec and McAfee and some others that actually put out yearly cybercrime reports where they analyze all the data that they have. So I'm not an expert on all the books that are out there from an academic perspective, but it's an ever-changing landscape, and I think it's very important to tap into one thing that may be of interest to folks, that in fact a lot of the research in cybercrime actually occurs in the private sector, because they're operating the networks and they're operating the infrastructure, and they're aware of what's going on and across the globe. So I would definitely look at some of those things.
I had a couple of questions about Wi-Fi access. Is there any extra precaution that a person should use before using Wi-Fi, and is there any way to make Wi-Fi safer?
Well, yeah, so there are a couple things here. Depending on what kind of computer you're using, we don't try to get too deep into the technical device, but usually there's a way. Computers can, on networks, be public or private, and usually there's a way to set up your computer when you log on. Sometimes you might get requested every time you log on to a new wireless network. In other operating systems, you may have to go in there and do it before you go on. That can make your computer private. So make sure it's not public. Make sure it's not broadcasting or accessible to other people on the network. Sometimes it has to be accessible, especially in a work setting, right, where you might be sharing data and other kinds of things. So it just may be that that's the appropriate mode. On the other hand, make sure when you're on Wi-Fi or out in the wild, so to speak, that that mode is not available. Back to sort of those basic precautions, you know, the more open the network, the more dangerous it is. Be extremely aware of how you're connecting to the internet. I mean, if you're down at, you know, Joe's Cafe and he's like, we got free Wi-Fi, I mean, you have no idea who else is on that network. You have no idea, you know, who's sitting in Joe's back room on that network. You just, you know, I mean, frankly, using those networks at all has some risk, and I would try to stay away from them. On the other hand, you're in a network that requires credentials, it's always better.
So on a similar vein, there's a couple of questions about people who know that their machine or their network is infected, and they want to know how to get that clean and not become re-victimized. What would you tell those folks?
So if you think in any way, shape, or form that you've been infected, you need to, well, first thing would be to make sure that your security software program is up to date. If you don't have a security program, better get one right away. Then I would go to, if you go to actually the stopthinkconnect.org website and look for, we have a campaign called Keep a Clean Machine. You'll find a list of companies that will scan your computer for you and clean up your computer if there's a problem for free. They're all free. All reputable companies, you know, who will do this. So that's something you can do. So if you think, ooh, I might be infected, maybe my security software didn't pick it up, you can go to one of these, you know, and they will, and you can scan it, and they will tell you if there's a problem. So you try to clean it, the machine. If you really are nervous about it, I mean, frankly, you could disconnect from the internet right away, run your scan on your computer with your local AV program just to make sure, and then, you know, reconnect and then try and go do these things. So, but if you're, you know, if you really think there's a problem, you should, you know, work on your computer offline for a while.
We have a question from someone who works with persons who are elderly, and so they want some suggestions about the elderly, and also because sometimes those people with the elderly have other people who have access to their passwords. You know, what any suggestions do you have for those sort of situations?
Yeah, those are, you know, and I think, so a couple of different suggestions. I mean, this is true of families in general, right? Not just the elderly when it comes to passwords. I mean, how many children know the passwords to their parents' phone, right? Because these devices are no longer singular devices attached to individual people. They become devices that belong to the entire family, you know, whether it's a tablet or a laptop or a phone. So we need to use extreme caution with that. And so with young people, obviously, you want to teach them about that and not to share it, not to give it to anybody else. I understand this point with elderly people may have other people who are assisting them, maybe helping them pay bills, maybe helping them do other kinds of things, you know, check on account status, do other kinds of things. You need to use caution. I think that even if somebody else is, you know, helping you do these things, you got to go in and look for irregularities. Things that, you know, maybe shouldn't have been paid, or maybe payments that were made that shouldn't have been paid, those kinds of things. And I would encourage those people to change their passwords on a regular basis, right? So that, you know, if you had a caregiver and they left, now you have a new one, you should change your password so that old caregiver can't get back into the computer, you know, remotely with your logon and password. So there has to be some management on that side. I know it can be difficult. it can be difficult for all of us to remember passwords. So I'm not picking on elderly people here. I would also say that they should write those passwords down, even though that's not advice that's always given. But they should write them down on a piece of paper, and they should put them somewhere safe in their house. I mean, don't store them on the computer in a Word document or a spreadsheet, because those could be lost. But the likelihood that someone's going to break into your house, get into your sock drawer, and steal your password list is much less than someone might steal them off your computer. So you can do those kinds of things. I would also just limit the access that people have and try to make it as easy as possible, or use as few accounts as possible that you give access to.
In the same vein, there have been a couple questions about some of these electronic password keepers. Do you recommend them, or what should people do before trying to use one of them? Yeah, so on the that's a great question. So there's a couple different elements to this, right? There's the autofill, which is available on a lot of web browsers, which I really recommend people don't use, right? I mean, unless you think no one ever in the history is ever going to get access to your computer, you could use that service. But autofill just means, hey, the next person sits down to my computer and goes to my banking site automatically and says, do you want to use, your password that's already in there? Bing, and they're in. So really, especially people who travel, oh my God, you don't want to. I mean, your technology may not even be stolen. You could lose it, and people lose stuff all the time, right? So it's not always, and somebody just turns on your computer and then they're in. So yeah, I don't really recommend the autofill. Some of the password managing systems, are okay. They should be from a reputable company. There are some of the security software, the major vendors, like if you're already running one of the major security programs, I think all of them now have some form of identity management service in there. You can certainly feel a little more comfortable with those. You still may not want to put everything in there. There may be a couple that, like bank, maybe you want to keep your bank out of everything and only you know that. It's not that they know your password, but so you have to look at how it's being managed, who's managing it. But some of those are fine, but the autofill, probably not a good idea. What about reporting to the FBI through ic3.gov? Is there any recommendations you would have to encourage folks to report crimes?
Yes. So I would encourage people to report crimes, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, because we actually don't have good enough reporting. If you report a crime to the IC3, you're not going to get necessarily hear back from them, and it's not going to guarantee that it's going to be investigated. But there are some things that may happen. So if your incident was already part of a larger incident that they were looking into, and I think those of you who work in this field at some level know that there have been some cases where there are literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of victims, right? Or if they're making a case in a certain, or trying to uncover a new kind of fraud or thing, it's going to be extremely helpful to them. But it's not like getting a report, traditional crime, where somebody reports a crime and you expect, your local law enforcement, to follow whatever procedures they have for investigating or following through on that crime. That's not going to happen. But the information getting to the FBI is really critical, because when we think about cyber in lots of ways, and this is just one of them, our traditional infrastructures have not grown yet to compensate for them. So, we see that in the area of law sometimes, and I think crime reporting is one of those where we don't quite have the infrastructure together to really collect as much as we need to know. So I really encourage people to report with the understanding, as we always do with people when we work with victims, that that's not going to necessarily mean that their case is going to be personally handled or resolved.
We have a tremendous amount of questions of people who are concerned about their own home security, and I know that you addressed that a little bit, but people want to know what's the best that they can do for their home Wi-Fi, or what sort of protocol to follow when things keep changing, and how do they know? If you were to just highlight a couple of bullet points, what would you say the most important things people could do to protect their own home networks?
Their own home networks, number one, that every Wi-Fi router should be password protected. So often they come with a actually I should say the router producers are getting a little bit better. It used to be that everyone basically came with a the password set as administrator or admin, right? And a lot of people never change those. And so you could drive around town and you could log on to people's wireless networks because it was admin. And so you just tried it out and you could, do a little, stealing of people's networks. And I think we've seen some of that. Actually, there's been some cases like in child porn where people have tried to get on other people's networks to protect themselves so it looks like the information is going through a different network. So that's one. Two, you get to name your network, right? Usually when you set up a router, or if you haven't, you set it up a while ago, you can go in and rename it or set a new password. Don't put, your address. You can see that sometimes. If you open up your computer and look for wireless networks, you'll see things that have like people's address or people's names or, the Kaiser family network. That's broadcasting to the world. So, give it some name or give it a number or, just some obscure thing that no one could ever attach it to you directly. Those would be like two key pieces of advice. If you have an older router, you might want to just go to the website of that company and check it out. It's possible that there's updated software for it, and there may be some security patches in that. So you could do that as well. Those would be the three things I think everybody should take a close look at for their router. For their wireless networks, and then of course, you're gonna, you may be giving out that password to people, right? So if you have guests come to your house, they're going to need that password, and you can decide after those guests leave whether you think it's an appropriate thing to change that password, depending on how the visit went. That was kind of a joke, but
Well, we have another question here about bank fraud. When some of this material people have caused harm to others, what should they do for resources to respond to bank fraud?
You mean if they've been individually defrauded, or I assume?
Well, in the beginning you mentioned a lot about one of the big areas was banking and finance, and a lot of theft occurs there. They want to know when theft occurs, what should they do in terms of if it involved using the personal identifying information to get some money out of the person's bank?
Absolutely report it to the bank right away. In some cases there may be some protections. Unfortunately for small businesses, a lot of those are not protected from losses that get taken during a cybercrime. I think there may be some changes coming in that, and there are some civil cases now around around responsibility and liability for when transfers get made inappropriately. But a lot of the individual consumers protected. You should definitely report it. You should report anything that's suspicious. You should investigate yourself and report immediately any things that appear on your bank account that don't look like they should be there, that you can't remember if you ever made that. I know sometimes it's difficult because sometimes you do business with a company and then when they actually charge your account they have kind of a different name, but that makes it harder for us as consumers actually. And you should just report it and investigate it as soon as you can. And you have to, unfortunately these days, you kind of have to keep tabs on all these things. Your bank records every month, or online periodically. Take a quick look and make sure everything looks the way it's supposed to look, and report it immediately.
So obviously, as consumers, people need to worry about themselves and take the appropriate steps. But where do other people become liable if there's a data breach?
That's a great question. It's going to be different in different places. There is no current federal data breach law. Some states require different kinds of notification and different kinds of actions after a data breach, and it varies. Like notification or maybe credit, reporting for free credit checks for a period of time, or other kinds of things. I don't think the liability question is 100% resolved. I mean, the good news for most consumers, if it involves a credit card, their liability is like $50, and I think in a lot of cases the banks don't even go after that. So the banks almost accept all the liability on some of those kinds of losses. I think in other areas it can sometimes be the business could be held liable, and a lot of businesses don't survive a data breach. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but Symantec did a report a couple of years ago, and a high percentage of businesses that suffered a data breach or a data loss in some way, shape, or form actually went out of business in the next 12 months. So, it's an emerging area at some level.
So you mentioned there was no national data breach law, but we have had a couple questions about what is the future, what legislation, what activity might be coming down the pike that some of the people who are on this call ought to be aware of.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion about the need for a federal data breach law, and we don't do a tremendous amount of work in that regard in terms of policy. I think there's actually a lot of interest from everybody in that because it's one of those areas where, especially, and we deal a lot with larger companies as opposed to smaller companies, but where it would be easier for them, for example, right, to have one data breach law for the whole country, which they could comply with, right, in one way. And so I think there's been some discussion of that, and I think that could possibly be a good thing for folks, so that we could create a harmonized and universal expectation of what would happen when there is a data breach. And I think that's one of the issues now, is that it's not clear for everybody what happens, and it's not clear when companies even need to tell you that they lost their data. So I think some of that, clarifying that as kind of a community or society-wide expectation, I think would be a really good thing. Personally, whether it's legislation or otherwise, I think more transparency when data is lost is in everybody's benefit, and I think we have to move away from a lot of finger pointing and blaming. Certainly if there's negligence, and we should address that. But when you have organized crime trying to steal your data, it's in everybody's best interest that that gets reported, because then everybody can do everything they can to fight it.
So there's also a question about where can people find the breaches that are known? Where do people go to find out where the breaches are listed?
Well, that's a good question. In all honesty, I'm not 100% sure if there is a central breach notification area. I know that the Verizon report is very good. That's historical. I know that there is some reporting, obviously, in the media. Set up your nice Google alert for data breach or hacking, and you'll find out a lot of what's going on as those get revealed. I know that there are some other groups, and I can't remember off the top of my head now which ones, that actually do a little bit more active of this. They actually comb that stuff. So I would actually use your favorite search engine and just ask for a list of data breaches, and you might be able to find something better than what I've given you.
You may also be able to go to your home state's Attorney General's office or other consumer office, and they may have lists in your state there.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent advice as well.
So there have been a number of people who have asked for the slide deck and whether it will be available and whether they can use your hints. So we will make them available, and there's also one particular one that also wants a link on the NCSA website. So hopefully that could be provided as well.
Yeah, you can provide the whole deck as far as I'm concerned to anybody who wants it. I mean, and just a little advertisement for ourselves. And actually, I see somebody in the comments said that the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse has lists of data breaches, and that's one of the groups I was on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't remember. So that's great advice. Just a note: everything on NCSA's website is free to use. You can take it, you can use it. You don't have to attribute it to us. We are believers in getting the word out. Come use it. On Stop Think Connect, we have a lot of pre-made materials that people can take, but if they want to sort of integrate the message more deeply, and you can find out about this on the website, there's other things you have to do to use that information, but a lot of it's all free. We don't charge for anything. So yeah, come staysafeonline.org or stopthinkconnect.org and come take all the information you want.
All right, we probably have time for one or two. Let me try to find a couple in an area. So here's one concerning electronic medical records.
Yeah.
They're asking, because of facilities reporting breaches, what extra precautions should victims of whose medical records have been broken into should they take?
Well, I think medical records. the thing about medical records that give me the most pause is that it's enormous amount of information about you, right? I mean, really, just tremendous amounts. I mean, we all know, when we go into a medical facility, the kinds of information we have to give everything, right? Name, rank, serial number, social security number, date of birth, parents, mother's maiden name, all these things that, go in. And then it's our very, very most private and personal medical information. So I think the things that people need to be, do around those things is, one, they're going to have to be very heightened awareness of whether that information is being used in any other way. So, again, back to the basics, the credit reporting, the other things. I would be changing passwords again. I would be looking at my bank accounts. I would be doing all those things because that kind of information can, be the gateway to credential information, right? Then I think they probably need to check and make sure, on their insurance records as well, to make sure that someone's not trying to steal their identity and their medical information in order to steal their medical insurance, which I know can happen in some cases. And so they need to be aware of that. And whether, I don't know all the rules and regulations about medical identity theft, but I would assume that if you felt your medical records are stolen, you might want to notify your insurance company at some level.
All right, last question. Someone wants to know about how to be involved in the future and what they should do to, help both victims of crime and to be more aware of cybersecurity. What should they be looking to do in the future to be involved and help people who have problems in this area?
I think there's a couple things they should do. We like to encourage everybody to take the time to get educated themselves and then educate the people around them. So somebody asked about older people earlier. If you're educated about this, then you're going to be more able to educate your grandparents, your older relatives. But get engaged. Get engaged in National Cybersecurity Awareness Month every October. Get all the tips and advice. Go down, educate your customers if you're a business, educate your citizens if you're in government, educate your clients if you're in victim services. Take the time to educate the people in your orbit. We use what we call the trusted network model of education. We believe that people respond to and act on information to be safer and more secure if that information comes from people that they trust. So our goal is to create harmonized, good advice and let people, like all the folks on the phone here today, bring that to the people in their orbit. So there's National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. There's Data Privacy Day in January. There's Safer Internet Day in February. There's a whole host of ways that people can get involved, and we encourage them to do that. So come to our websites. Use your website. Russell has great information, and educate people around them.
All right. Well, Michael, we really appreciate all the time and effort that you gave today to help educate those that are involved in the crossover between identity theft and cybersecurity. We have your information there online. We'll also bring up some information about the National Identity Theft Assistance Network, just to let people know that we're putting together a toolkit of information that will be available to help people in their community, whether it's an individual organization or a group that wants to form a coalition. And we will be having some replication efforts for those that would be interested in some training and technical assistance in their communities. So please feel free to take a look at the resources, and we thank everyone for participating today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure and an honor.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the webinar for today. We thank you for your participation and ask that you please disconnect your lines.